Hey everybody, welcome back. I am Ruadh Butler, a writer of historical fiction books such as these, which if you'd like to read a bit about the Norman invasion of Ireland in the 12th century, do check them out, the description out, and you can get a link to these books, these wonderful books. Today we're going to talk a little bit about one of those famous Norman families who came across to Ireland in the 12th century and became pretty much more Irish than the Irish themselves. That is, of course, the great Burke dynasty, or de Burgh, or Berg, de Burgh. What to say about them? Well, by the start of the 14th century, they were pretty much the most powerful family in Ireland, living on the island, and they had land stretching from Limerick through Connacht, the most western province of Ireland, and all the way to Ulster on the extreme northeast of Ireland, and Carrickfergus and what's now Belfast. However, within a generation, their power had been all but smashed and the family were almost to the wind. And we're going to find out today about how this family came to become one of the most powerful families in the 14th century. They did recover, and they are now one of the most numerous families in the whole of the island, but we'll learn a little bit about this family. This today is about the Burkes. I suppose the first thing to do when we talk about the Burkes is just to talk a little bit about the name. They do have several derivations of the name Burke. When they arrived in Ireland, the name was de Berg, and we'll talk about with an H on the end, D-E-B-U-R-G-H. And we'll talk a little bit about that in a second. But they also had a Latin derivation, which is de Burgo, which is sometimes used in earlier writings. That was obviously hypernicized, that is made more put in the Irish language, the Gaelic language, as Burke, from which we get the name Burke. Now that can also be spelled a couple of ways, with a B-U-R-K-E, or possibly with an O in it. So there's a few variations on the name, but they are all of the same background. Where do we find Burke? Well, the Burkes sort of come into history in the middle of the 12th century, and we don't know who the progenitor of this family is. There's a few different ideas. Some people call the earliest known person Walter. I find no evidence to say that there is a Walter out there. But the four brothers we find first in living in East Anglia. I should say that this on screen is the coat of arms of the Burkes, the Burke family, the Burke dynasty. Gold with a red cross on it. But we can move on here. I should say that first and foremost, we are going at the end of the video to find out a little bit more about this figure and how he fits into the scheme of things. This is Chris de Burgh, very famous singer of Lady in Red, probably most famously, and we'll find out a little bit more about him at the end of the show. We find out about the other earlier Burkes of the 12th century. Where do we find the Burkes? Well, they live or first found in this area. This is East Anglia in England. And well, after the Norman conquest, it was granted to a Breton family who subsequently lost it in 1075. At which point, it became really the property or controlled by the Bigot family, a Norman family called Bigot or Bigod, and the main castle or the main fortress in the whole of this area is Norwich, which is still a very significant city in eastern England. The Norwich, of course, sits on the river Yare, and it actually flows easterly towards the North Sea and goes right past a little place which is marked on that map, which is called Burgh Castle. Now, again, you'll have already spotted that that's the old name, de Burgh of Berg, and this is where these four brothers originate. Berg is actually the name, Anglo-Saxon name for a fort or fortress, not a castle so much as a fortress for protecting people rather than dominating people, which is what we always think of Normans attempting to do. But obviously this was an exceptionally interesting place because it was first a Roman fort on the River Yar, as you see at the back of this picture, which is from English Heritage Site, by the way. So if you give them a like if you can. And this fortress, this outer wall, sort of marked the extent of the what we'd now understand to be a bailey of a castle. You know, the outer fortress. And the family of Berg, de Burgh, pardon me, actually built a motte in the southwest corner of the of this fortress outline, which would have been their sort of rallying point should have everything gone wrong for them and when they were under attack. At this point, of course, you know, surnames are much in flux, and so we call them de Burgh, you know, referring to this place. Of the four brothers we should really talk about, they were William, Hubert, Geoffrey, and Thomas. We'll start from the youngest. Thomas actually became a royal appointee. He was made Constable of Norwich, as I say, this huge fortress in the under royal control in East Anglia. So presumably the Burghs were pretty close to the royal family, which was of course in the mid 12th century the Plantagenets, the Angevins under Henry II. Now we don't know where the Burghs actually come from. They might be Bretons. My thinking is they're probably Normans of a knightly class rather than a baronial or noble class. And basically, Thomas, who was the youngest son of, or youngest of these four brothers, he was made Constable of Norwich. So he was in charge of the day-to-day affairs in Norwich on behalf of the crown, and was a very successful man by all accounts. His next eldest brother, the third of these four brothers, was Geoffrey de Burgh. And he, as a lot of third sons of did in this time, went into the church, rose pretty quickly through the church ranks, and by the reign of John, King John, in the 1215, sort of from about 1200 to 1216, he was Bishop of Ely. He became Bishop of Ely in about 1215, if memory serves. Very important role, one of the most wealthy sees in the whole of the east of England, and probably in the whole of England, actually. So along with that would become political power. It would become, you know, the power that you would have as a religious leader. So again, we can see that this family is picking up roles and picking up importance, despite the fact we don't even know who the father of these four brothers were. The next older brother, the second brother of the family, is Hubert de Burgh. Very, very successful administrator and soldier, who again under King John, who came to the throne in 1199, the younger brother of William the Lion, or Richard the Lionheart. Hubert de Burgh was pretty much his right-hand man and actually became Justiciar of England, which would, I suppose, be sort of like Prime Minister today. Hubert was later, you know, he won battles all over the place, and he rose to become one of the most powerful men in England, particularly under Henry III, King John's son, and he was made Earl of Kent. And his descendants, well, unfortunately, he became came to a bit of a cropper and lost his earldom. His son had lands in Lincolnshire and maintained those lands right into the Tudor era when they were made Baron Berg. And so they were re-ennobled after losing their earldom of Kent. And Barons Berg lasted into the Tudor era. And one of them actually became Lord Deputy of Ireland and campaigned kind of around where I live in Northern Ireland. He was Lord Deputy of Ireland and died fighting against Hugh O'Neill. So slight connection with Ireland there as well from the English-based Burghs. But our story today really, I think that's Hubert de Burgh there anyway. There's a picture of him from a medieval doing penance somewhere in England. But our story today revolves around the eldest of these four brothers, William de Burgh. William was, as I say, born probably in the mid-1160s, possibly at the start of the 1160s. And by 1180s, he was starting to gain traction with it. You know, his brothers were all being appointed to major roles in England and in the royal court. And so they were, they started to make a little bit of headway as well. And presumably William became a close friend of King John, who was Prince John, in the mid 1180s, and was pretty high up in his household by all accounts. I suppose we should also make mention of a few sort of Burke family myths or legends. One that this depiction of the shield here was when a certain Burke, unnamed, was fighting alongside Richard Lionheart in the Middle East, and he apparently saved Richard's life, and Richard dipped his finger into a fallen enemy soldier, one of Salah ad-Din's soldiers, and drew a cross on his gold shield, and that's how this shield came into the possession of the Burke family. Of course, there's no basis in that in reality, as the Burkes at the time that Richard was fighting in the Middle East were actually all in Ireland. So what other ones? There was another one I read somewhere about the name Richard coming into the family because Richard, one of the de Burghs, married an illegitimate daughter of Henry II or Richard Lionheart. Couldn't find any evidence of that, but who knows? These things happen in history, and who knows about that one. Interestingly, these arms are the arms sometimes borne by the big O Earls of Norfolk, who had mentioned earlier in this piece. It may be that they were linked to this more powerful family of Earls of Norfolk in some way. I know from the Butler family experience that the Butlers adopted their arms from the Glanville family, with whom they had sort of married or had a close familial connection with. So it's possible that these are simply related to the Big O family. In any event, they're now far more famous as the Berg family arms. There are, of course, numerous pedigrees, but we are going to deal with the descendants of William de Burgh in the main family lines, even though there are many, many Burke family lines coming from all directions as the generations pass. Yes, so how we should say this, in 1169, a bunch of Normans under the general leadership of Robert Fitzstephen crossed from Wales to Ireland, which we see on the left of my screen, and took over quite a bit of the land. And I hope you can see my cursor. I'll just try it in this region, Kilkenny, Waterford, between Waterford and Dublin. And that is the land of Leinster, one of the 5 kingdoms of Ireland at this time, major kingdoms of Ireland. They were quickly followed by another bunch of Normans under Richard de Clare in 1170, and he landed and took both these cities, the city of Waterford and the city of Dublin. We remember Richard de Clare far better as Strongbow nowadays, and I'm going to refer to that from here on in. Quite soon after that, King Henry II of England, he decided that he didn't really like the thought of having an independent Norman kingdom sitting on his western seaboard. So he crossed with a huge army of about 4,000 soldiers and landed at Waterford in 1171, in October 1171. And basically what happened was this was an overwhelming large army in the terms of the day, and both the Normans, the Normans under Strongbow, Robert Fitzstephen, they all came down and submitted to King Henry at Waterford, at his court in Waterford. Henry then took Waterford, these cities that had been made by the Vikings back in 300 years before. He took these for his own, into the hands of the royal family, and that included Dublin, Waterford, and Wexford, which is just over here in this little bay. And what he said was that Strongbow could basically keep the rest of Leinster, so this little quarter of, or fifth of Ireland down here. And for the rest of his life, Strongbow fought to pretty much make that a reality. And from his little base at Kilkenny, pretty much this was his capital city at Kilkenny. There were other castles all over the place, but that was his main base. In order to sort of keep Strongbow on his best behavior, King Henry II actually installed another Norman knight from just on the Welsh borders, just in this region, called Hugh de Lacy. And he gave Hugh de Lacy this land, which is called Meath. It was a 5th province. Now we have 4 provinces in Ireland, but in this stage we had 5. And Meath basically stretched from Athlone to Drogheda and then down to the borders of Dublin. and Hugh was given that land and given quite a few other responsibilities in the Ireland. However, it was a few years after that that our friend Strongbow actually died in 1176, at which point his two children were too young to inherit. So Leinster actually came into the hands of the royal family. The children became wards of the crown, and in that capacity, the king was able to appoint administrators for this huge kingdom, this conquered kingdom. So Leinster, Meath, both under Norman rule at this stage, pretty much under Norman rule, but it was still being fought over by the Gaelic Irish. The Gaelic Irish had also, the Gaelic Irish in this part of Ireland, Munster in the southwest, were ruled by the McCarthys of Desmond, South Munster, and the O'Briens, a very famous name, of Thomond, North Munster. They had both submitted to Henry at the same time as Strongbow had, so their land should have been saved because they'd submitted to the king in 1171. However, in 1177, King Henry granted Munster away to a number of other Normans, and for the next 10-15 years, we have Normans flooding across the border from Leinster into Munster and fighting for these lands. We'll not delve too deeply into that, but safe to say, 1177, an invasion of Munster by Normans. I must do a video about all the various invasions of the various areas of Ireland. Pretty much at the same time as Munster was being invaded by Normans, a knight called John de Courcy, who was based in Dublin, he'd possibly been in Ireland since 1172, but more likely a more recent arrival. He pretty much off his own back decided he was going to arrange an invasion of Ulster, which is this portion of Ireland here. The northern extreme of, well, at this stage it was called Ulla or Ulla, and it was sort of that region around Lisburn. But it now gives its name to the entire province of Ulster, which takes in Donegal and Tyrone and Fermanagh and Monaghan, etc. John de Courcy, pretty much off his own back, had 300 troops, and he marched them out of Dublin in January of 1177 and into Ulster and defeated the local king and managed to set up a private, independent principality in what is now Northern Ireland. We have to remember that name because John de Courcy and the Earldom of Ulster will come back into our story at some point. So again, we're at 1177. We've got independent princes in Ulster. Meath is under Hugh de Lacy. Leinster, ostensibly owned by the family of Strongbow, but really under the control of the crown. And both Thomond and Desmond have been attacked by our friends, the Normans, in various guises. The state of affairs in Ireland wasn't going to last very long. Unfortunately, the crown, they never trust these independently minded people. So in 1185, Henry, who had wanted to name his youngest son, John, Prince John, King of Ireland, couldn't do that, but he made him Lord of Ireland, a title that had been granted to Henry himself by the Pope. He decided to send John across into Ireland to basically make sure that Ireland was under royal control. How do you do that? Well, you send a huge army first and foremost. It had worked back in 1171 for Henry. Why wouldn't it work for John? So John collected all his buddies, all his bestest friends, and probably traveled over to Wales and Milford Haven most likely, and then set sail in just towards the end of 1185. And who was amongst them with this great undertaking? A young chap from East Anglia, a very ambitious young chap from East Anglia called William de Burgh. William must have been one of his closest pals. I cannot imagine he was anything other than a close pal of Prince John, because when they arrived in Waterford, William de Burgh was probably with him when John received a bunch of Irish kings at his court in Waterford, as had his father, and they wanted to submit to this, prince, 18-year-old prince, and this vast army that he had brought with him to Ireland. Unfortunately, John, being a brat, insulted these Irish kings and made fun of his clothes, pulled their beards, they wore long beards in those days, and really insulted them to the point where these kings left. They came looking to submit, and they decided, no, we can't have this whippersnapper doing this to us. So they left and went and found help amongst the O'Briens, who were in those days led by a chap called Donald More O'Brien, a descendant of Brian Boru. Please do check out my other video. I will put it in the description about Donald More O'Brien and the O'Brien family. However, this, they decided they were going to make a fight of it. And this drew John and this vast army out of Waterford. And they advanced along the Suir River, and as they went, they made Tipperachny Castle, and amongst others, and basically made their way towards, in a sort of general way, towards Lismore on the Blackwater in County Cork. What to say is that he later, it turned out to be an absolute disaster for John. He lost. His forces were attacked again and again and again, a sort of guerrilla warfare along the way, and it proved to be an absolute disaster for King John, or for Prince John. And towards the end of 6 months, John decided he had had enough, and having advanced only as far as Lismore, he circled back and went back up to Dublin. And within 6 months, he was back in England, and that was a complete disaster. What to be said about Prince John in Ireland in 1185? He had pretty much one success on the field, and that was at Cork, when a chap called Theobald Walter either murdered or had a fight with the McCarthys. Doesn't look good for the Butlers in that case. Anyway, that was their one real success. Otherwise, complete disaster. They did find a number of castles on their way up the River Suir Valley, one of which is marked on the map, which was granted to the person we're here to talk about, William de Burgh. He was also granted Kilsheelan, also on the River Suir, and Kilfeacle. These are rather interesting because they're obviously on the river, the major river leading down towards Waterford. So obviously this is a major way to travel up and down into the very into the guts of Ireland, really. And so again, I can only presume that William de Burgh was an incredibly trusted knight under King John at this time, as he was granted these castles. He was also granted Castle Connell, which is on the River Shannon, just into Limerick, I think. An incredibly powerful castle again, which on another major river controlling Limerick, or hoped to control Limerick. And this would be one of the major estates of the Burke family for the next 400 years, 500 years. But most importantly, King John, before he left Ireland in 1185, appointed his buddy William de Burgh as Constable of Limerick, this major Viking city, this major financial hub, this major marketplace. And it was from this appointment that the de Burgh family would find greatness. They would become a great family in Irish terms. I'm just consulting my notes. Yeah, it might be slightly surprising to some, but pretty obvious, I think, if you're a person in the Middle Ages, that considering where William's where the lands are that William's that he's carving these estates out of the lands of the O'Brien family lands. This is basically a lance straight across the O'Briens, the lands that the O'Briens have, and landing in Limerick, which had been under O'Brien family ownership for 100 years, 200 years perhaps at this stage. It was 100 years, sorry. 100 years have been under O'Brien ownership. And so it could have been taken as a real challenge to the O'Brien family, and probably was. So to modern ears, it probably is a little bit odd that what did the O'Briens do to stop this? Well, they married off one of their daughters to William de Burgh. To the medieval mind, I'm sure that is pure, the most obvious thing to do in entirely to make stop this onslaught on your lands. Marry him off, make him an ally. And in and around the 1190s, we see that William is helping the O'Briens fight their traditional enemies, who were the McCarthys of Desmond. We mentioned them earlier on, who reside down in this area. I think if we go on, here's the lands of the O'Briens, and here's the lands of the McCarthy. And in the 1190s, we see William de Burgh, Constable of Limerick, assisting the O'Briens in attacking the McCarthys. And that was how the Normans operated quite effectively against the Irish in this period, in that they would choose one dynasty over another, they would choose one sept of a dynasty over another, and support them. And that's how they operated in this time, divide and conquer and all that. However, by the time we hit the year 1200, the Burgs have now been in Ireland 15 years. They've still got relatively meager lands. I know we'd seen quite a few of the castles there, but that was, in the grand scheme of things, when you see the lands that have been awarded to Hugh de Lacy or Strongbow, they are rather mediocre lands, but not for long, because William de Burgh is an ambitious man, now probably approaching middle age. He has a plan, and part of this plan was actually handed to him. Back in 1169, Dermot MacMurrough had invited the Normans into Ireland, into Leinster, and in 1200, Cathal, the red-handed O'Connor, the king of Connacht, or a challenger for the kingdom of Connacht, actually sought William de Burgh's help in securing his kingship of this vast province, which to this point hadn't really felt hadn't been invaded by the Normans. Every other part of Ireland, Ulster under John de Courcy, Meath under the de Lacys, and every part of Ireland had felt some fight from this Norman invasion, this great undertaking by the Normans, of huge importance. Now the O'Connors, who had been the last people to hold the High Kingship of Ireland, had invited William de Burgh into Connacht under with the idea of helping him. And in 1200, William did just that. He pushed north to the O'Brien through his brother-in-law's lands and into South Connacht, and helped Cathal, the red-handed O'Connor, to secure his throne. Cathal, unlike Dermot MacMurrough, had a bit of an idea about the danger of these Normans. 15 years after the fact, or nearly 25 years after the fact, he had an idea how dangerous these Normans were. So he quickly chased, that's the area of the O'Connor family in those days. He basically chased William de Burgh out of Galway, out of what is now Galway, and back to Limerick. And that was not going to stand. The Normans, that's not how they operated. So in 1202, now with a royal grant, he'd managed to get a royal grant off his old buddy, King John, who was now King John, not Prince John, King John. William de Burgh said, right, this is the time we're going to take lands in Connacht. And he pushed north from Limerick, once again, into the lands of Connacht, and battled against Cathal and the O'Connor family in that area, and actually shoved the O'Connors basically out of this really lovely part of Galway, and pushed them towards Athlone and the O'Flahertys beyond the lakes into Connemara. And it was entirely successful. This guy of medium sort of knightly class had now conquered lands, oh God knows how much that is, 1 million acres, 500,000 acres, a huge estate in the west of Ireland. This success, of course, made him a bit of a target. I presume it was King John who had proven throughout his reign that he was unwilling to have other people have success. And so he wanted to limit or curb William de Burgh's power, and called for him to come back from Ireland to London to face charges against him. And at some point between 1204, somewhere in there, 1205, William de Burgh, this great conqueror, the father of the Burke family, went over to England and he subsequently died, probably 1205, 1206, somewhere in there. This was pretty troubling for the Burke family because the head of the family obviously passed to a male in those days. The headship of the family actually passed to his young son, who was probably only, you know, in his early teens at most. His young son Richard became a ward of the crown, as had the children of Strongbow back in 1176. Now in the early 1206 we have the Richard de Berg, the father or the head of the Burke family, becoming a ward of court at the court of King John in England. Luckily for Richard, he had a very close ally at court who was his uncle, Hubert de Burgh, the Earl of Kent, who we mentioned at the very start of the video. And he was able to, you know, use his influence to keep Richard in the frame, that he would, you know, he'd be able to retake these lands that he had lost in Ireland. And around 1214, 1215, he would have reached his majority, that is the age of 21. And Richard de Burgh was able to return to Ireland. And with the help of his uncle, he was returned as the constable of Limerick. So he's put back in charge of this great Viking city, which had been proven so important to his father's ascent to greatness. Richard was now in the early 1220s back as constable of Limerick. And a few years after that, certainly before 1230, but you know, not too many years before it, he was able to you know, make good on his claim to be the Lord of Connacht as well. And he pushed north from Limerick back towards Connacht. And I can't keep on going, we'll just stay here. And he pushed north into Connacht and once again shoved the O'Connor family out of there. You know, the Normans had exceptional martial skills. And he was able to claim the, you know, probably fought every day for the rest of his life to make this claim reality. His eldest son, he married into the de Lacy family. I cannot remember the connection to the Hugh de Lacy, the Lord of Meath, but he had several sons. He died in the early 1240s, if memory serves, and was succeeded by his eldest son, who was also called Richard, who didn't survive that long and had no children of his own. So all these lands, the lands down in Tipperary and the lands in South Connacht, they all went to his next eldest son, who was called Walter de Burgh. Walter de Burgh became Lord of Connacht. Lord of Connacht, this kind of hopeful Lord of Connacht. It wasn't the whole, Connacht actually stretches all the way from Galway up to Sligo and to the west coast of Ireland. But he had, you know, he had a good claim to be the most powerful lord in Connacht. Walter, who came into his estate about 1248, had done very well, married very, very well. He had married a lady called Maud de Lacy, a cousin of his. There she is on this family tree. And we'll refer back to this a few times, but if you want to take a look at that, do pause the video here and pick it up in a second. Walter de Burgh, he had married Maud de Lacy. She was a descendant of Hugh de Lacy, who had been, if you remember back, had been made Lord of Meath. Hugh de Lacy's son, Hugh the Younger de Lacy, had actually invaded Ulster in the early 1200s and had booted John de Lacy, or John de Courcy, out of Ulster and had been made Earl of Ulster in his own right. So he'd done very, very well. The de Lacys at this stage were not only the Lords of Meath, but they were also the Earls of Ulster as well. Unfortunately, their male family line died out in the 1240s, and leaving Maud de Lacy as the heiress to this vast estate. Not only the vast estate in Ulster, I should say, and she was the sort of, well, I call her the Lady of Ulster here, but she was, her husband Walter de Burgh, already Lord of Connacht, became Earl of Ulster, a very ancient title, which we will follow for the rest of this little chat about the de Burghs. What to say about Walter de Burgh? He was one of a number of sons. We can see the second, the very short-lived Richard de Burgh there in the middle. His younger brother was also William the Younger de Burgh. And his sister was Marjorie de Burgh, who married an ancestor of mine called Theobald Butler. and founded the lines of Butlers of Ormond. We will give them a mention in a wee while too. However, we're going to look at the third son, William Og de Burgh, who was created seneschal, or governor, really, sheriff, that sort of thing, of Connacht. Because of these two really powerful, massive land masses that the Berg family now had, Walter de Burgh, the Earl of Ulster, decided he would appoint his younger brother as kind of governor of his original lands in Connacht. So William went down into Connacht and basically acted as his deputy in Connacht, while Walter de Burgh was up in Ulster, making sure that the family had superiority there, and all the people, all the Normans and the Gaelic families up there were under his boot heel. As with any of these Norman families, and all these Norman families have pretty much the same story. We call it what we say now is, some of these Norman families like Butler and Fitzgerald and Burke, they all became more Irish than the Irish themselves, and that is true. They did become more Irish than the Irish themselves. But as we can see, it's the elder son of each of these families, every single generation, and all these families are the same. The eldest son always marries into English family or into another Anglo-Irish family. And that was for purely political reasons. To be seen as Irish in these days probably would have been politically silly. However, all the younger sons are marrying almost exclusively into Irish families. So presumably William Og, his wife might have been from the O'Malleys or from the O'Flahertys or from one of the other great families like the O'Rourkes or the O'Reillys in the area of Connacht, because then you've got political connection to these families. I mean, everybody in this on this family tree was no doubt was Irish speaking, because you have to be able to communicate with the people around you, even if you're fighting them. That's just how the world works. Cooperation vastly defeats, opposition. In any event, we should just take a quick moment to recognize that you can see a kind of divide in this family tree, whereas Walter de Burgh, the Earl of Ulster, actually is the father of the later Earls of Ulster, the main line, as well as the Burkes of Clanconal, whereas William Og, the sheriff or seneschal of Connacht, is the father of the Burkes of Clanrickard and the Burkes of Mayo, the MacWilliam Yoctor, who are going to be playing a major role later in our story. In any event, we shall just talk a little bit about these two brothers, Walter and William. In the 1270s, these two men were actually defeated at a battle, a very famous battle called Athankip, or Athanchip sometimes, Athankip, in Connacht by the Ed O'Connor, who was obviously a descendant of Cathal the Red-Handed. I think he's a descendant, he might be a distant cousin. In any event, William Og was actually killed in this battle, and Walter de Burgh, after the defeat, he died a year later. And this again left a young man. Whoops, that's the regions of the Burke family in the 1270s. And that's how, what a story am I telling? This is on the left, we have the arms of the province of Ulster. And you can see it's the Burke family arms quartered, or with the O'Neill family arms in the middle. In any event, back to the story. At the death of Walter de Burgh in 1271 and William Og de Burgh at the Battle of Athankip in 1270, all those lands came into the possession of Richard de Burgh. And Richard was about 11 at the time of his father's death, and he became second Earl of Ulster. And from this point on, we're going to refer to him as the Red Earl, because that was one of the names he was known as. Richard, the Red Earl, he actually grew up in England as basically the ward of the crown. The crown at this point was held by King Edward I, who, by the way, couldn't have given two hoots about Ireland. He was not interested. All he wanted was troops and food from Ireland to help him in his conquest of Wales and Scotland. Anyway, Richard actually became a close friend of Edward, who we remember as Edward Longshanks of Braveheart fame. And he actually became seemingly a rather close friend of the King of England. So he was by far the most powerful nobleman in Ireland, with the lands in Ulster and Connacht and Tipperary and Limerick. He was also pals with the King of England. I mean, that's a pretty powerful bunch of people. In any event, he at this stage, we know that Edward Longshanks was trying to take over Scotland, or certainly impose his superiority over the whole of Britain. And as part of that, again, we'll talk about this. This is Richard the Red Earl's cousin, Walter Lea de Burgh, which is Walter the Grey, the Grey, I think, or something like that. He was the son of William Oge, and he had sort of inherited his role as Seneschal of Connacht. So down in Galway, he was very much involved down there as the deputy, or certainly the stand-in earl. He was a very successful man. So this was his. These two were a pretty powerful twosome. Richard returned to Ireland when he reached his majority, as had his father before him, and had tried to establish control over his lands. He quickly did this because he was a very talented guy, and he quickly managed to bump heads with one of the other most powerful Norman lords of the day, who was the Fitzgerald family. And they had a feud throughout the 1290s, which was hugely destructive across the colony of the Norman colony in Ireland. But they'd finally made a bit of a peace in the early 1290s by basically swapping castles in each other's territory. So Richard gave up castles in Kildare in return for the Fitzgerald castles over in Sligo. And they came to a bit of an uneasy peace. It helped that the Red Earl's daughter, Joan, married Thomas Fitzgerald. Oh, try again. If we look at this family tree, we can see Thomas Fitzgerald over there. And he is the father of the Kildare, House of Kildare, who are now, the head of that family is the Duke of Leinster, Maurice Fitzgerald, who lives in Oxfordshire, I believe. We'll continue with our story. Yes, so Richard de Burgh, friend of King Edward, now a close familial relation of the Earls, or well, the Fitzgeralds of Offaly and Kildare. His best friend, or his close compadre, is William Lea de Burgh, this Hibernicized, very talented warrior down in Connacht. He's also the Earl of Ulster, Richard the Red Earl. He's the Red Earl of Ulster. And if we look at the map of his sort of lands in those days, you can see why he was the most powerful noble in Ireland. You can also see why, when the King of England wanted to unite or sort of earn an ally in Scotland, he was all about invading. He was the hammer of the Scots. Edward Longshanks was the hammer of the Scots, of course. He looked to his best friend, Richard the Red Earl, to provide a daughter to ally with the House of Carrick. This is actually not Carrick, this is Turnberry Castle in Ayrshire, which at this point in time was under the ownership of a chap called Robert Bruce. Robert Bruce was a very powerful earl from the Lowlands, and as you can see, you could basically see his region of influence from Richard the Red Earl's earldom in Ulster. So it made a lot of sense for these two to make a marriage alliance. It would also make the Bruces and the Burgs closer together, and through that, the Kingdom of England would have a close ally in the Bruce family. Didn't quite work out like that. In the 1307, Robert Bruce declared himself to be King of Scots. That's a whole other set of history, but it would end up in 1314 at the Battle of Bannockburn, King Edward II, the King Edward I having died, invading Scotland and being absolutely annihilated at the Battle of Bannockburn by Robert Bruce, at which point Robert Bruce was the King of Scotland. This, of course, didn't go down well with the English crown, and they had already actually taken Robert Bruce's wife, Lady Elizabeth de Burgh, the daughter of the Red Earl, as a prisoner and was holding her in England in really quite awful conditions. Rather odd considering how much they relied on the Red Earl for his support in this term. So rather silly, but it worked out for the best, I suppose. Anyway, 1314 comes along and the Scots are on the offensive. They have decided that they are going to take the fight out of Scotland and into England, and they have decided, in order to make that invasion of England a bit more likely to succeed, they would send another army across the Irish Sea, this being the Irish Sea, across the Irish Sea to attack Ireland, thus keeping troops that might have been going across the Irish Sea to England to help there, keeping them in Ireland. And Robert Bruce, the King of Scotland, decided that he would send his younger brother, Edward Bruce, to Ireland to raise all the Irish clans and declare him to be King of Ireland. This is the town of Larne today. If you go that way, that's Scotland. You might even be able to see Scotland in the background of this picture in the top left. That is a very natural harbour, and it's in this area that Edward Bruce actually landed in 1315 with an army, I think about 8,000 strong. So that's twice the size of the armies that King Henry II and his son Prince John had brought to Ireland, roughly 100 years, 150 years before, 100 years before. So a very, very large army, and they actually linked up with the O'Neill, Brian O'Neill, King of Tyrone, and had and launched a campaign against the Bruces. As we can see from the family tree, there is Robert Bruce, who had sent his brother to Ireland, and his brother had landed in the lands of his father-in-law. His father-in-law, Richard the Red Earl of Ulster, Richard de Berg, and this was taken as a great insult by the Red Earl, who immediately called all his loyal forces together to oppose this upstart brother of the King of Scots, and that included the family of the Earls of Kildare, who are now the Earls of Kildare, the Fitzgeralds. That included Edmund Butler, the Earl of Carrick in Ireland, not Scotland, who was at this point the Justiciar of Ireland, the crown representative in Ireland, the Prime Minister of the day, who obviously had all the backing of the royal garrisons and the royal administration behind him, called him, and they all started flooding towards Ulster to oppose this Scottish army. And unfortunately, all those people, despite being cousins and brothers-in-law and sons-in-law and all that, they could not get on together. And the Red Earl actually struck out alone, leaving the other guys behind seemingly. And at the Battle of Connacht, he was absolutely and utterly annihilated. It wasn't even close. He had called all his allies from Connacht up to help him as well. This included Phelim O'Connor, who was a kind of friend is maybe too strong, but an ally of the de Berg family. His cousin William Leah de Berg came up from Connacht as well. And all the de Berg army was absolutely annihilated at the Battle of Connacht in 1315 by the Edward Bruce. What we know about the Red Earl from here on in is that he was basically a wanderer in his own lands. He was wandering from castle to castle, with very few supporters. His cousin, this very trusted cousin, William Leah de Berg, was actually captured by the Scots and sent over to Scotland as a hostage more than anything. Phelim O'Connor, his erstwhile ally, went back to Connacht and rose in rebellion against the de Bergs. It was absolutely horrendous. The only good thing to be said is that Edmund Butler and the Fitzgeralds managed to get away, and they went back down south out of Ulster and back into Meath and Leinster to regather their strength and see what was to be done about this Scots army. To make matters even worse for the de Berg family, and we'll deal with them for the moment, the Red Earl's eldest son had actually died in 1313, leaving only a young baby son called William. as his heir. So the heir to the Red Earl was actually a baby boy, his grandson, who was living in England as another ward of the crown. So that made it all the more difficult that his grandfather was basically stuck in Ireland, trying to fight for his grandson's patrimony. In 1318, and despite many efforts to try and claim the kingship of Ireland for his own, Edward Bruce was actually killed at the Battle of Feuds. What do you think? Just outside Drogheda, which is north of, just outside Dundalk, which is north of Drogheda on this map. And he was beaten by John de Birmingham, another son-in-law of the Red Earl, which at least stopped the onslaught by the Scots. At this point, Edward Bruce was killed, and Norman rule over Ireland could sort of be re-established. I think the Red Earl managed to live into the 1320s when his infant grandson William became the Earl and took over the vast lands of the family. In the intervening years between 1321, I believe, or in the mid 1320s, and when William returned to Ireland in the early 1330s, a few things happened. William Lea de Burgh, who had been a hostage in Scotland, he was actually replaced by one of his brothers, Edmund, who would thereafter be known as Edmund Albannach, Edmund the Scotsman. William Lea de Burgh came back and did his level best with one of the uncles of the new Earl of Ulster. We'll try and maybe look on here. William Lea, or Walter Lea de Burgh, excuse me, he did his level best along with Edmund de Burgh, of Castle Connell, to kind of control these vast lands on behalf of the family and on behalf of William de Burgh, this grandson of the Red Earl, who had become the Earl of Ulster. They did their level best to try and maintain Burke family control. The outcome of that was that these two men, very powerful in their own right, had kind of become, when you're given control and you're doing all the work, it kind of feels like your efforts should be rewarded. Your efforts should be given respect that they've done. And when William Don de Burgh, as a 21-year-old, returned to Ireland from England in 1331, these two families belonging to, Walter Lea de Burgh and Edmund de Burgh, as well as Edmund Albannach's family, kind of didn't want to be told what to do by a young upstart, wet behind the ears Englishman, really, for all accounts. And it caused no end of problems because William Don de Burgh, William the Brown de Burgh, the Earl of Ulster, he decided to establish himself as the principal, as the superior member of the family, that he would do one silly thing, and he murdered his grandfather's close friend, Walter Lea de Burgh, near Belfast in 1332. Murdered him, and it would lead to the absolute collapse of Burke power in Ireland. As a response, in the following year, Gilles de Burgh, the sister of Walter, and her husband Richard de Mandeville, actually brought about the murder of murdered William de Burgh, the Earl of Ulster, bringing an end to that family line, because though he had married, left only a daughter, and so that was the end of the main line of the de Burghs. In 1333, what happened was William's widow fled to England along with her little daughter Philippa, and later in the 1350s, she actually married to the second son of Edward III, King Edward III, who was called Lionel, the Duke of Clarence. And the earldom of Ulster passed through her to Lionel's descendants, who was called Elizabeth. She was the Countess of Ulster, and she married into the Mortimer family, who would later become so powerful, and they would subsequently marry into the family of the Dukes of York, giving all their land, the earldom of Ulster, the half of County Meath, which had once been the de Lacy family lands, to the family of the Duke of York. And that's how the Duke of York was so powerful during the era of the Wars of the Roses. Completely sidetracked there. Back in Ireland in the 1330s, we have the death of William Donn de Burgh. Where is he? That's Carrickfergus Castle. Edmund Butler, I'm catching up. William Donn de Burgh, we have he being murdered by Gilles de Burgh, the sister of Walter Leah de Burgh. And it caused what we now call the Burke Civil War. And there were three branches of the family that were fighting this Burke Civil War, were fighting basically for superiority, for recognition as the superior family within the family. Really, the head of the family was this chap, who is Sir Edmund de Burgh of Castle Connell. He was the male, senior male agnate of the family. Agnate might not be the right word. And he was based in Castle Connell, that is down in the original family lands down in Limerick. Unfortunately, despite being the legitimate heir to all these lands, he was also probably the weakest of the three. Nevertheless, he left descendants who included the Burkes of Castle Connell, or Clan Connell, Castle Connell, who were became barons Britis in that era, in the 17th century, and were very high up in the Jacobite forces during the 17th century. Edmund himself didn't fare too well. In 1338, he was actually murdered in Loch Mask as he was campaigning against his cousin, Edmund Albonach de Berg, the chap who was sent to Scotland in place of his brother Walter Leah. So Edmund Albonach, his family had actually moved into Mayo, that is the northern part of Connacht, during the 1320s and 1330s, and it conquered pretty widely. And they'd actually taken on a lot of Gaelic Irish customs, as I say, younger sons marrying exclusively into the Irish clans. And of course, if your mother is speaking Irish and has all these Irish ideas and Gaelic Irish customs, you're going to have some of those, or a lot of those. And over the next few centuries, the MacWilliams, which is the name they would later take, would become more Irish than the Irish themselves. They actually became MacWilliam Eochtar. Eochtar means lower, even though it's more northern. This is lower Connacht, and that would be the name they took. They would also become Burke of Mayo. The current head of this family is the Earl of Mayo, Charles Burke, who I think lives in Connemara somewhere. And this is a family we'll come back to at the end of the show, but he, a very powerful man, and obviously had taken out the legitimate heirs of the family. So had a good shout for being recognized as the head of the family. However, there was another, and that was Ulick de Burgh, or Ulick Burke, who was of an illegitimate line. Actually, I believe this was an illegitimate line of the family. They had sort of settled in and around Galway and that area that Walter de Burgh, William de Burgh, his great grandfather, had conquered back in the early 1200s. In and around county, what we now see as County Galway, and they had taken this again, like the MacWilliam or Eochtar. They had been highly Gaelicized, having married into the various Irish clans, and their name, now they were probably called rightly the Upper MacWilliam, but we'll call them Clan Rickard, as they were descended from Richard de Burgh, and they took the name Clan Rickard, the clan of Richard. And they would go on to become pretty much the most powerful family, or a branch of the family after the 1330s. What to say about them? They would continue to vie with the Burkes of Mayo for superiority throughout the Middle Ages. The Burkes were probably, having had this feud very much diminished, allowing the main power in the colony of Ireland, the Lordship of Ireland, to move away from the Burkes and towards their cousins, who we've mentioned already, the Fitzgeralds of Kildare, who were extremely powerful in and around the Pale, and the Butlers of Ormond, who were probably in the short term the major recipients of the power given up by the Burkes because of their feud within their own family. In the 15th century, it would definitely pass the Fitzgeralds, but in the 14th century, it was pretty much in the hands of the Butlers. Now, the Clanrickard Burkes would actually become slightly more, we could say that, becoming more Irish in themselves. It didn't go both one way. It was a bit in flux all through the Middle Ages. So, for instance, Ulick Burke at this time was a very, very Gaelicized Norman, to the point where you probably wouldn't have seen the difference between him and some of his cousins, his mother's kin. In the 16th and 17th century, when England started to try and reestablish English control over Ireland, Ulick de Burgh was, for political reasons, forced to become a little bit more, his descendants would become a little more anglicized. And in the era of Henry VIII, they would actually give up their Irish titles and grant or surrender their lands to the English crown, and were created Earl of Clanrickard. So they were given an English earldom in replacing their Irish titles. And throughout the 17th century, I think 17th, 18th, 19th, they were given 3 different creations of a marquisate, that is one down from a duchy, a dukedom. So they became Marquis of Clanrickard, only to die out in the mid 19th century. So that is the story of this hugely important family. We'll just very quickly before the end just talk about a modern de Burgh. This chap, Chris de Burgh, singer and songwriter, who most people I think will probably know for Lady in Red. You can, if you're a little younger than I am, you can maybe give it a Google and see Lady in Red. Very popular at weddings when I was growing up. And we can see how he links into this family tree. His name is de Burgh. You'll notice that he's not one of the Burkes. The most people who have of this family or this lineage have the name Burke, B-O-U-R-K-E or B-U-R-K-E, but he's de Burgh, and we're just going to find out a little bit about how that came about. His ancestry is actually through the MacWilliam Eochter, this family from Mayo, who are now the head of the family is the Earl of Mayo. Edmund Albonach, this person we've mentioned before, he was succeeded by his son Thomas, and Thomas actually has many, many, many sons. And in the Gaelic way of doing things, unlike in most of Western society in these days, you were succeeded by your eldest son. He got the whole shebang, lands, castles, the whole thing. In Irish society, of which the Burkes in these days were, that they had taken on that custom, you could be succeeded by a cousin, a nephew, a brother, an uncle. You could be succeeded by a son. It was really who was recognized as the most capable. And in this way, Thomas, the second MacWilliam Eochter, was succeeded by his 4th son, Walter, briefly, because they never lasted very long. And Walter, I think, was succeeded by a younger brother as well. And it's sort of the kingship, which is what it was, passed from his line of the family. However, Walter married quite well to this lady, Sive O'Brien, daughter of the kings of Thomond, or a relative of the kings of Thomond, and they inherited through her this place called Drumkeen, which is in County Limerick, I think, certainly down that neck of the woods, and that would be the major land and estate that this family, who would obviously take the name Burke, they abandoned the name de Burgh, this French version of their name, and took the Irish version, Burke, and would live at Drumkeen for many, many generations. We can see here on this little family tree, this very quick family tree, that Walter was succeeded by his son, William Dove Burke, then by his son, John, and then we'll skip a few generations to what I think is into the 18th century. Richard Burke, who is still at Drumkeen. Now, at this time, of course, we have penal laws. We have many, many unfair laws passed in Ireland. leading to the Catholics being unfairly treated. And I think it must have been Richard Burke, who living at Drumkeen, who probably decided that he would he would reform or conform to the recognised religion of the state, Anglicanism. That's the Church of Ireland in Ireland. And his son Ulysses, no, Ulysses, that's a bit odd. I think he's probably Ulick, but anglicised to Ulysses. And to make himself seem slightly more upmarket, slightly more bourgeois, and slightly more anglicised, Ulysses took the surname, or returned to the surname Berg. Rather than Burke, he became Berg. And he rose pretty well through the Church of Ireland to become a bishop, which was an extremely important position in those days. Not so much nowadays, but in those days, very, very important. If we look to the top here, we see Ulysses, the second person down, father of many, many sons, one of whom founded a line of the Berg family at Burt. And Ulysses de Berg, his grandson or great-grandson of the Bishop of Ruadh, he actually inherited a barony from his distant cousin and became Baron Downes. Now, it didn't go any further than that, but it's quite, I think you see how influential this family were becoming again, having been isolated by their Catholic, being Catholic in the 16th and 15th century. Here we see them becoming more and more prominent going into the 18th century. If we look to a younger son, Thomas de Burgh, he was a surveyor general of Ireland. Now, I don't know if he had any qualifications to survey, but presumably he had the family backing to be put into this pretty important position in the 18th century. If you think about what was going on in the 18th century in Ireland, there's rebellions, there's Republican uprisings in France and America, and there was a very real chance that Ireland could have broken away in the 18th century and become a separate country with a similar political outlook to America and France. And presumably Thomas Berg had, being in charge of surveying the country and making maps and what have you, was very important to the army. Complete me going off on another tangent. His son and grandson both lived at a very lovely place in County Kildare called Old Town, just outside Naas, which is a very famous stud for horses. So you can look that up if you want to, if you're interested in that sort of thing. Nevertheless, we'll go on with our little family tree here. Again, there's been a sort of family of going through the church and reaching prominence through the church. We can see that the elder son, Thomas, was Dean of Cloyne, which is down in Munster. And I include this only because I live close to Arboe. It's William Berg, a son of the family, was a rector of Arboe, and his son was the Archdeacon of Kildare. It's continually having sons in prominent positions, presumably in the army as well as the church, presumably in political terms as well. The next Thomas Berg, back at Old Town in Kildare, and his son was actually High Sheriff of Kildare, hugely important in those days. We're now going into the late 19th century, edging onto the 20th, and we can see that two of the sons of Thomas de Berg, I should also mention that Thomas, you'll see a name change there, going from simply Thomas Berg and the Dean of Cloyne to Thomas de Berg. He was actually granted the right to bear the name of his the traditional name of the family, de Berg. So he's back to being de Berg rather than just Berg or Burke. So again, I think we can see something, or get an idea of something of what is going on in this family. Prominence is what it is. His two sons did, his son obviously became High Sheriff of Kildare, which is a prominent position. I keep on using the word prominent. And his son, Sir Hubert de Burgh, knighted. His other son, Sir Eric de Burgh, knighted, a general in the army. The elder family, obviously still at Old Town in County Kildare. But Sir Eric, General de Burgh, he actually bought an estate down in Wexford called SWRDLND, just outside Wexford town. And Sir Eric, he had two daughters actually, the elder of whom was called Maeve, and she married a British Army officer who I believe was from Argentina. and their son, actually, Christopher Davison, performed apparently at Burgh Castle in County Wexford for any guests they had coming in. And when he decided he wanted to go into the music business, he adopted his mother's name and became Chris de Burgh. And that is how our friend Chris de Burgh became owner of a very ancient, very auspicious family name in Ireland. So I hope you enjoyed that little, very quick run through the family of the Burke family, the great family who had been so prominent in the 14th century, so powerful into the Gaelic Irish revival, and have survived to become one of the most populous names in Ireland today. If you'd like to find out more, there's a couple of channels online that I should point to. Burke's East Galway has got quite a bit of details if you'd like to look at the heraldry in particular. And the Irish History podcast has got a great series about the Burke family feud of the 1330s. So do take a look at it then. Again, I'll post them down in the description to make sure you get access to those. But a hugely interesting family. Hope you enjoyed that. Do check out my books, and do please consider subscribing to the channel. We've got one podcast that I'm planning for a couple of weeks will be something linked to the Burke family, which will be all about the de Birminghams, another great Connacht family. So keep an eye out for that. In the meantime, thank you for watching. Hope you enjoyed it, and do leave a comment if you are a Burke or you are of Burke descent. And yeah, make sure to tell your Burke friends and family about this little video. Thank you very much, and see you next time.